Yeah, Sim Salabim. Welcome to the Sixers Talk podcast, brought to you by Wilmington University. WilMU Works. We're back. Danny Pommells, Noah Levick here at Rivers Casino right on Delaware Avenue. If you're in the area, come check us out. We'll be here for about maybe an hour more here as we're chopping up all things Sixers. Talk a little bit of free agency. Ben Barry's like, nah, we're not going to be here an hour. Talk a little free agency. The latest with what's going on with Sixers assistants getting new jobs and possibly having intel on what this team is capable of doing and sharing it with the enemy. And as well as today is Allen Iverson's birthday. 48 years old is the answer. The step over anniversary was earlier this week, 22 years of that. And nothing like talking Allen Iverson.
Well, right. I think he scored 48 in that game. So that's,
that was some synergy. Noah, bring it full circle for us, please.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Very synergistic there, but it is a little wild to say that he's 48 years old. That feels like a high number for someone. I'm sure we all think of.
And we just saw him in Everything But the Chip on NBA TV for those that watched that. Yeah,
we did. Yeah, some memories from that 01 season. But man, I think he's one of those guys. When you hear the name Allen Iverson, the image is,
indelible.
The 26 to 28-year-old. It's not the guy who's 40. Not the guy who's 48, but obviously he is.
But props to Allen. The cornrows still hanging in there. You can see me. I've since let go of my hair, but Allen still going strong with the cornrows.
Very strong with it, and he, I think, enjoys like being appreciative of other guys in the league and just being a fan of the sport. He's not one of those former players who's at all bitter or at all trying to say
he's not a hater.
The league was better back in his day. Yeah. So I think props to him for that. And I believe it is also Daniel House Jr.'s birthday. And
we're gonna go right to Daniel House, who will be back next season.
Just talking.
No, I'm just saying, he will be back next season.
Birthdays and free agency.
Yeah, there you go.
He picked up the player option with the Sixers for
synergy, man. You're killing me right now.
I'm in the groove here. So it was the $4.3 million option via, the biannual exception he signed. And I think it's solid for the Sixers, guy who had a pretty big playoff game for them in Boston, game 5. And he will definitely be in the mix for Nick Nurse. And he will be coming back. And then beyond that, of course, there's a lot of uncertainty for this team.
How hypocritical would it be for a guy like Allen Iverson, who lived on the edge of being, avant-garde, walking to the beat of his own drum, to hate on the younger generation and what they want to do that's unique and bring in their own style and whatnot. So I'm glad that he realizes that would be so hypocritical of him to do something like that.
Yeah, well said. I think he is a true original and has a lot of respect for guys who also are individuals and
do it their own way,
their own style. So absolutely. But 48 points in that game 1, and that's always a fun rewatch. I did that rather early on, I believe, in the period where the NBA was shut down. And it's pretty incredible stuff. That Lakers team obviously.
Wait, you rewatched that first game of the finals?
Yeah, game 1 of the finals.
Okay,
and
I thought they did a good job with that aspect of the documentary on that Sixers championship team. I thought that just the way they played out how the game 1 was, and Iverson's impact and the way he was unstoppable, hearing from Shaq, and I would have loved to hear from Kobe, obviously, but I thought they did a good job with that. And it was crazy. One of the things that stood out to me, for those that didn't see it, was Iverson really got emotional, which wasn't a surprise, but the fact that he said while getting emotional that he would have rather not even have gone to the finals if he knew they were going to lose. And I was just like, man, like that was kind of like the culmination of the season. Like not getting there would have been like, I don't even know if I would even remember it the same way, you know what I'm saying? Or be as enthusiastic about it, I should say.
Yeah. And obviously every player has their own perspective on it. I think for him, he's just such a competitive guy and so full of self-belief.
Right. He said he couldn't bring the championship to his teammates. So he felt like he didn't even want to get there.
He felt like he could do anything and that he failed by, not getting those 3 wins that, would have gotten the Sixers a title. But I think obviously an extraordinarily successful season, and the Sixers have not had one that good since.
Love talking to Allen Iverson. We are burying the lead a little bit because we're embroiled. I guess this is going to be a weekly update up until James Harden makes a move or decision or some finality comes to this, because we are embroiled and immersed in this Harden decision of, one, what's going to happen as far as his contract goes, whether he's going to exercise his player option or decide to become a free agent, and do the Sixers want to keep him around for the length of time that he wants and pay him what an all NBA player should make over that type of contract. Sham Charania with the latest report saying that Harden is torn. He's torn between the Sixers and Rockets and what decision to make, and being close to his family or pursuing a championship here with Joel Embiid. And it's just so weird to me, Noah. I wonder who those reports are for. Like, to me, as and me and all other fans out there and reporters and writers and things like that, we can all see, I think, behind the thinly veiled ruse by Harden in a sense to maybe leverage the Rockets wanting him to give Sixers to give him a bigger contract or more money. I don't know who those reports are for, because I feel like Daryl Morey can see past that idea that Harden might want to go to the Rockets, because I just don't feel like, if you're a player who's into the twilight of their career and has a chance to win a championship with the reigning MVP, what is tearing you away from that to possibly pursue going to a rebuilding Rockets team and not contending for a championship? So I feel like, who are these reports for? Because if we can see past that thinly veiled idea that the Rockets are so passionately chasing James Harden, like, I know Daryl Morey can easily see past that. Does that make sense, or what do you think?
It does, but I think it's obviously not just all about basketball, right? Like, he really established roots in Houston and has family there, and I think returning there would be incredibly meaningful for those reasons, and just from a life perspective. But yeah, I mean, there are basketball reasons one could make that Houston would be a decent spot. I tend to agree with you.
Where are you at with it? Where do you feel? I see you playing both sides, and you make a great point, but how do you feel?
Well, I think
you think Houston is in hot pursuit and that he's really having a tough time making a decision between these two locations and these two teams in that same way that it's being presented?
I just think there are genuinely a lot of factors here. There's the money side of it too. And as I've said, my understanding is the Sixers are not super inclined to give him 4 years and 200+ million, whereas Houston very well might be willing to give him substantially more money. And that's a factor for guys legitimately to consider when trying to make these hard decisions about their career. So I think also obviously the Sixers have a new head coach, so that complicates this a bit. And I imagine is, yet another factor for Harden. And then also I think probably notable that got the draft coming up here in a couple of weeks. The Houston Rockets have the 4th pick, and let's see if they do anything big either on or before draft night in terms of
sign and trade type of thing.
Well, perhaps using that number 4 pick to get a big name.
Oh, not necessarily in relation to the Sixers, but maybe across the NBA landscape.
Just in terms of what they look like for James Harden as he tries to figure this out.
Gotcha.
Is what I'm saying.
Yeah. So that could really up the ante maybe a little bit as far as them being a more desirable destination for him, or he might feel like they're putting their foot in the right direction to kind of be a contending team.
Right. If they can be convincing that they're not miles off from the Sixers in terms of their competitiveness in, let's say, 1 or 2 years, then maybe that is a moderate factor for
Is he the number 1 free agent out there, Harden?
I would think so.
You think he's top of the list? Yeah,
I think he would be. As you said, had a real case for All NBA, did not make it, but 10-time All-Star, led the league in assists, and though the final 2 games of the playoffs were disappointing, also did some pretty darn impressive stuff there. Probably shouldn't forget that he single-handedly won them Game 1 in Boston, essentially, and was really, really excellent in Game 4 as well. So I'm sure James Harden's camp is making note of these things and trying to use them to do what's best for their guy. But Yeah, as I've said throughout, I sincerely think that there won't be finality here and clarity for quite a while. So a lot of wait and see and a lot of scuttlebutt and rumors until
Excellent word.
decisions
Scuttlebutt.
indeed need to be made. But
Yeah.
we're not quite at that point. And there's I think I hear what you're saying,
Yeah.
that there are always little wink games that are played and guys on both sides of the table trying to create little bits of leverage.
I mean, this started out in December, man. Like
Started a long time ago.
Like
Yeah.
the Woj report first came out way back then, just kind of documenting that Harden's like, oh, what am I going to do?
Yeah. So yeah, like I definitely agree with all that.
Credit to them of being way ahead of it.
They got way on top of it. Yeah, no doubt. But yeah, I think also James Harden has a lot of stuff on his plate that could sway him in one direction or the other, and I think that's real, that aspect of it.
And you have to, like, the Sixers are playing both sides of this thing because they have to be prepared for him not being here, in essence, and also try to woo him and lure him in for a team-friendly deal that can, because he kind of, I know, right? You're like, well, he's not going to play team-friendly again, because after one season of doing that and, you know, adjusting the numbers to sign Daniel House and PJ Tucker, he's not going to do that for a second season, right?
I'm sure his camp and the Sixers don't have exactly the same definition of what is team friendly.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps common ground can be found, perhaps not, or perhaps Houston makes a very high money offer that the Sixers just aren't willing to meet.
And so right now they have, I think, single digits worth of cap space, whether that's like $7, $8, $9 million, something around there, with Harden not being counting against the cap. Do you feel like they can pursue a free, Van Vliet or someone else out there with that available money to replace him?
Definitely Fred VanVleet would not be a guy you could just straight up sign. That would have to be a complex sign and trade sort of situation. So I guess the straight answer to that is no, you're not going to get a tier A, tier B free agent with the, biannual exception or the mid-level exception or something. But sure, there are other creative avenues the Sixers could take if James Harden is not coming back to add a very good player, perhaps. I think that's not out of the question.
In their best interest, though, to keep him around, it seems like, yeah, all things considered.
You could argue a bunch of ways on that, but I do think that's fair enough and perfectly reasonable. Yeah, he's going to be in his mid-30s, but if it is not the super long-term, huge money deal, then I think the idea of having him back sounds pretty good for this team. You'd be losing a lot of production if he left. He has really good on-court chemistry with the team's best player. And I think if he's back, just having that as a sure thing would be excellent for the Sixers. And you heard Nick Nurse say he's a great player. I think that's no denying that. He's a flawed player, but he still remains very great in his mid-30s, I think.
I also heard Nick Nurse say that he doesn't vibrate on the frequency of the past, which is just a all-time press conference quote that is just really resonating with me, Noah. Do you vibrate on the frequency of the past?
Here and there, yeah.
Okay, sometimes you have to be honest with us.
I think it's aspirational to not be that way, but sure, I think a little past frequency, has to creep in there.
We have been introduced to Nick Nurse. We have gotten to know some of his platitudes and perspectives and things like that when it comes to basketball. And you mentioned how he said that Harden's a great player and he would like to see him on this team, in essence. And, Nurse is coming in here. Funny enough, he comes in here with tremendous weight on his shoulders. And it's, he takes a job where instant success is paramount. Like there's really no wiggle room for him not to be transcendent in his first season. 50 plus wins, top 4 seed. Like the floor is really high here at this point. You know what I'm saying? Something what you're thinking.
Well, I agree with that from the standpoint of what would qualify as a good / successful season. I don't think that's realistically true in terms of like his job security, just because he's such a well-qualified coach.
Who wants to be on the hot seat, though? Who wants to be going into their second year?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I find it hard to believe that, a 48-win season and another second-round exit.
Don't nitpick me by 2 wins, Noah. Don't.
Well, yeah, sure. If it's like a disastrous season and the Sixers only win 40 games, and that's not because of injuries, and he does a bunch of baffling things, that is not good for his job security. But I think in all likelihood, he's going to do a lot of impressive things in year one. And yeah, there's a lot of pressure, but I do think he's ultra familiar with it. And as you alluded to, he's, yes, an intense personality, but I don't think he's someone who tends to be shaken by
pressures around him,
pressure-filled situations. It was interesting just listening back to his appearance on Danny Green's podcast, and he has this notion of addressing the elephant in the room head on. He had a literal toy elephant, I guess, on his desk in Toronto. And he apparently said that day one to their players, like, some issue bubbles up, we're not going to ignore it and just hope it goes away. We're actually going to discuss this and not be afraid of it. So I think that mentality is a good one to have in situations where the expectations are really high and guys can get tense and
he would have been
be frustrated when there's a 2 or 3 game losing streak and that sort of stuff. I think that's good to not pretend everything is okay when it's not okay.
He'd have been a great coach if Jimmy Butler was here, bro. Oh my gosh.
Nick Nurse?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Them both like being upfront and forthcoming in front of everybody. I think that would have worked really well.
Jimmy Butler and Eric Spoelstra is a very, very good pairing right now. And yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. Just stylistically, yeah, they're probably aligned in that way.
Sure. Yeah. So it is the Nurse regime, and Nick Nurse is going to have to make some of these decisions or help make some of these decisions on these key Sixers free agents and some interesting names among them. And we'll get to that after we take a quick time out here and pay some bills. We are brought to you by Wilmington University. Of course, we're here at Rivers Casino, but Wilmington University and students are in the game. Upskill in fields like cybersecurity, fintech, healthcare, and education in person or online. Get in the game at Wilmington University. Find us at wilmu.edu. And it's time to rush to new rewards at Rivers Casino. There's a whole new way for you to earn, redeem, and level up your rewards. Get your new Rush Rewards card and get more out of your game at Rivers Casino, Philadelphia. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Back here on the Sixers Talk podcast, Danny Pommells, Noah Levick, Ben Barry. And it is not true. I've read some of those internet rumors out there that Ben Barry breathes on the microphone like Kendrick Perkins. That is not true. Okay. He is not that type of CrossFit guy. You know what I'm saying? Ben Barry, excellent gentleman and human being. Noah, Ben telling me I'm number one. I am number one. Yes. Noah, Shake Milton. Let's start there.
Okay.
Do you want to see him in Nick Nurse's defense on his roster? Are you optimistic that he can be a difference maker if he's brought back here with the 76ers?
I think pretty consistently I've thought he's a solid NBA player and capable of chipping in shorthanded situations. I tend to think his defense has been a little bit underrated and that he's usually passable at a minimum there. So yeah,
I hear you.
I guess my overall take on Shake Milton would just be he's capable of being a legit rotation guy in most destinations. But look, given the situation in Philadelphia where he wasn't part of the playoff rotation, and there are a lot of high quality, or quite a few high quality bench players in all likelihood on this roster next season, Would not surprise me at all if he ends up elsewhere. And just trying to judge it now, that feels like the more probable outcome, that he ends up moving to the second team of his NBA career. But to the question of what he's able to do, sure, I think he has some Swiss Army knife capacity. And though he's not going to be an incredibly disruptive defender who's forcing a bunch of steals like a DeAnthony Melton, I do usually believe that he can stay on the floor defensively and obviously bring some nice stuff to the table as a combo guard off the bench, who's become a lot better at weaponizing his size and using that mid-range game, and had a pretty decent regular season this past year, but was not part of the Sixers playoff rotation.
Yeah, I'm gonna go out on a limb and feel like we've seen the best of Shake, and I'm not opposed to the best of Shake at all. I mean, I really was a big proponent of his earlier in his career when he's a little hampered by injuries and making his way through the G League. I don't need to see him back in Philly necessarily. I think his roster spot could hopefully be used for a more versatile player, although you did tout his versatility, a player who's a bit longer, a bit more interchangeable.
Longer. What? I mean, he has 7 foot wingspan.
Yeah.
So I don't think you're going to get
absolutely
many combo guards who have a more length than him. But in terms of how that length corresponds to defensive impact, yeah, maybe that is quite possible.
I appreciate you saying that. No, absolutely. And I think, and when I say long, I guess I mean more length that can be used to guard more positions on the floor. So Shake has definitely given me a lot of reasons to believe in his capacity as an NBA player. I don't think he quite meets the fit for what the Sixers need. And listen, I could definitely see him being a player that I lament, like Isaiah Joe or Jeremy Grant or, whoever you might want to name, Christian Wood, along those lines, who I see him on another team. And I'm like, man, I kind of wish that it had worked out here. So I'm going to agree with you, though, that I probably would imagine him on another team next season.
Probably also worth noting with him, and especially that the uncertainty with Harden matters, because if you're losing your lead ball handler, then a combo guard off the bench perhaps has more of a window to get opportunities. If James Harden's back, then maybe things are a little more crowded with the Sixers guard rotation.
Yeah, definitely worth something that the brain trust have to met out and figure out, because I mean, you have George Niang, a guy who also you would think has a role here and could fit in Nick Nurse's system, but may not end up being re-signed. Do you feel like he would be a guy Nurse would covet to keep around here with this team?
Obviously, defense is his worst end of the ball, but I do think Daryl Morey and Nick Nurse will both agree that shooting is paramount importance in the NBA nowadays, and you're not going to get much better than George Niang, who's shooting 40% from 3 year after year after year, and even in the past couple of years has become a little better at adding some wrinkles to his offensive game. Not a bad passer, can surprise you with a quirky drive here and there. So yeah, I think Nick Nurse is coming from a situation where there wasn't much quality shooting. Toronto was a bottom 5 team in 3-point percentage, and the Sixers were number 1 in the regular season. Niang was a significant part of that. I think that would be great for the Sixers if they're again at the top 3-point shooting team in the league. So yeah, George Niang I think is legit a valuable player. And I'm sure the Sixers are not the only team that feels that way.
I was just about to say, how do you think the competitiveness for his services will be? Because
I think the
price could go up.
Yeah, there'll be some interest. And yeah, perhaps it's a situation where the Sixers have to figure out how much they're willing to pay, how many years they would feel okay with. But for me, the idea of him getting a raise and being back here. Both of those don't sound unrealistic to me, honestly. Sixers picked him up like house with the biannual exception, and I think judging his 2 years here, that was a good signing. He's played above that value, and I think though defense is not the best tool in his game, was better there this postseason, and I do think he's a guy who can give you some important playoff minutes when you need shooting off your bench, and every team needs that. So that's how I see it with Niang.
Yang certainly putting his bid in on the Hoop Collective podcast,
Yes.
calling Nick Nurse a savant.
Yeah, he's a big fan of Nurse's savvy, and he did talk about free agency a little there. I thought it was interesting. He said, given the 82 game season is a real grind, that he prioritizes somewhere he feels comfortable and enjoys it and is happy day to day. And I think the Sixers check those boxes for him most definitely. So perhaps if it's a situation where he's weighing offers that are close in terms of the salary, he would lean toward Philadelphia.
Hey, he already has a nickname, the minivan, and Kate Scott's relationship might foster some of that goodwill and coming back to Philly that he might like. Noah, an interesting one. Late acquisition, Mr. McDaniels, Jalen McDaniels, seems like the type of player that could really thrive under Nick Nurse. Versatility defensively, bit of rebounding, didn't quite come into his own here with the Sixers in that short time span. But the price is also interesting. What are your thoughts on him, and would you like to see him back here in Philly?
I think, yeah, for many of those reasons you just said, it feels like there's a good chance he's back. Daryl Morey said straight up after the trade, they envision him being here and they think he has starter potential. He didn't have the intended or desired impact for them in the playoffs. But yeah, I think the defense obviously pops as a tool that Nick Nurse would certainly appreciate.
Mhm.
But I think also the cutting could be useful with Nick Nurse. I imagine the Sixers are going to have more movement around Joel Embiid in the middle of the floor this year. And I think Jalen McDaniels showcased that he's an instinctive cutter and also a guy who can finish around the rim when he does catch the ball, if those cuts. So yeah, I think there are quite a few reasons to think that he will land back in Philly. The Sixers have his bird rights, and with these internal guys, they will have to weigh how much years they're willing to offer and the cap situation in future seasons. Not wanting to hamstring themselves too much in that regard. But I think with Jalen McDaniels also, Daryl Morey talked about they believe he's a better shooter than the numbers showed in Charlotte.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at Nick Nurse's history, sharpshooter at Northern Iowa, and continues, I think, to have some belief in his ability to teach players shooting. And I imagine Nurse will be on the same page with Daryl Morey that, all right, if we try to tweak this or that in his shot, this is a guy who is capable of being in the high 30s on a good volume for us as a three-point shooter. That would be my gut feel on how they see that aspect of his game. So yeah, I think it wasn't a great half season for him. I think he was one of our lower grades on our last podcast, but trying to project ahead, my sense based on what we know is that the Sixers would continue to be pretty optimistic about him being a part of the future here.
I'm going to assume Montrezl Harrell will opt in to the last year of his contract with the 76ers. He has a player option along, just like James Harden. But what do you think? You have some thoughts on that?
I think it probably matters for him whether there's another situation where he'd feel more confident that he's in the rotation, because he's very much not right now. Mm-hmm. And then obviously there's another free agent who plays backup center, and Paul Reed.
In front of him. I got you.
Yeah, in front of him. Okay, so some factors for him to weigh, but
it's just that
I think
some team will have to really take a flyer on the expectation. They didn't see much of him this past season, and they're going to potentially think that he's going to want more than 1 year with whoever the next team he signs.
Yeah, I think at this point, he signed with the Sixers for the minimum, and didn't do anything to indicate that he's worth more than that.
Mhm.
So theoretically, if there's another team who offered him like
Would
a
be a prove-it
1-year
deal.
minimum deal,
Yeah.
and he thinks he's a little more likely to play there than Philly, maybe that's a deal where he goes elsewhere. But just being honest, he's not among the team's most significant free agents. I think the Sixers at backup center obviously love what Paul Reed brought to the table, and that was not as much the case for Montrezl Harrell. It was a disappointing year.
And we don't think we're going to see Dwayne Dedmon back here, right?
I would not think so. I think that's in all likelihood a no.
That ship has sailed. Okay. So do you feel like we're at a point where the Sixers it's funny because they don't have much cap space. You're kind of hampered by the Harden thing. This seems like a time, you don't have any draft picks. It seems like a kind of a lull for them after introducing Nurse, waiting for some of these decisions to be made. What do you think is simmering other than as far as the roster over there?
Well, the coaching staff for Nick Nurse.
Yeah.
And there was the notable departure of
Sam Cassell.
Sam Cassell joining the Celtics. So I'm sure Nick Nurse and Morey are working through who they want to add to this staff here in Philly, but Sam Cassell will not be a holdover. And obviously that is a substantial departure for this team. Played a huge role in Tyrese Maxey's development, as folks know.
Do you think that the Nurse, Nurse's camp let Sam know that they weren't retaining him, or he saw another opportunity that he wanted to jump on? Where do you think the scales tip there?
I mean, it's not at all uncommon for a coach to exit, assistant coach, once a new regime comes in. So I'm sure the Celtics expressed very strong interest and were thrilled to get Sam Cassell, in part because they're set to have a few guys leave from their coaching staff and join Udoka in Houston.
Mm-hmm.
So no doubt that Cassell will have like a very, very large role for an assistant coach there. Joe Mazzulla is only 34 years old, and I imagine that was an appealing spot to him. So perhaps, I'm not sure. Perhaps there was some reading of the tea leaves. Perhaps he was directly told, this is how we see things with you now in Philly. But I think regardless, not surprising at all, but no doubt a guy that the Sixers will miss in some important ways here.
Yeah. And it was weird seeing so much of that assistant coach news, coming through my Twitter feed and across some of my social sites. Fizdale joining Frank Vogel's staff in Phoenix, and Sam Cassell to Boston. And I think it was the Houston's former coach, Silas Jr. joining another staff. So
Bonnie Williams, I think, in Detroit.
There you go. Yeah. Okay. So, it was funny to see that. And I definitely I don't think Sam Cassell was the right person for this job, just because of we talked about in previous podcasts. I just think there's only a certain caliber of coach that can take one of these championship contending team jobs. You make a great point previously about Nick Nurse being a guy who led Toronto to the championship, and it was his first head coaching job. But I just don't feel like this was the tailor-made job for Cassell. I'm disappointed that he didn't get, many other looks. And do you think it's a big loss for this team, considering the relationship he had with Harden, Maxey, and some of the other guys?
Yeah, I don't think big would be significantly overstating it. I don't think like the Sixers will be destined to have a poor coaching staff now or anything. Yeah. But this was a guy who had a really big influence on Doc Rivers' staff, who he'd worked for the past 9 seasons. The Maxey relationship obviously stands out. I think his development has been exceptional, as we've covered a bunch, but the Harden relationship was also impactful. And I think people perhaps weren't aware of how much strategic influence Cassell had as well, working really on both sides of the ball, Doc Rivers said. And I think just the game day presence of a guy who's been there before and gives direct, blunt criticism in a way that resonates, but also, as we all know, quick to smile and crack a joke and, banter with these guys. That was important. But yeah, a bunch happening behind the scenes as well, with Cassell helping the Sixers to develop their guards and working on, some of the X's and O's stuff, quite closely as a guy Doc Rivers trusted a lot. So it matters that he's leaving, but in no way does this suggest that the Sixers are in a bad spot with their coaching staff. We literally don't know really anything about what Nick Nurse is going to do. His lead assistant in Toronto, Adrian Griffin, has taken the Milwaukee job, so that's not an option. And I'll be curious to see whether he brings some guys over there. He had Trevor Gleeson, who has an Australian background and worked at implementing some flex offense principles for Toronto. So that on paper looks to me like an option Nick Nurse might consider. But I think you recognize that he hired someone like Gleason, and you see this is a guy who's very willing to make some sort of outside the box hire, someone we've never really heard of before. So a lot that we will learn in the coming weeks. But yeah, to the question of what is bubbling, I think that would stand out to me. Just what is Nurse's staff going to look like?
You have an article on the website detailing how Nick Nurse's relationship with Marc Gasol might benefit the connection with Joel Embiid. Is that accurate? Well,
I'm not sure as much a relationship, just the stylistic similarities, perhaps. I thought it was interesting at Nurse's introductory presser that he brought up the name Marc Gasol as somewhat of a counter to the notion that he only coaches teams that are full of long, athletic, switchable players, and that he doesn't have a true center. Like this season, the second half of the year, he had Jakob Poeltl at center, who's pretty traditional. But Marc Gasol, number one, he guarded Joel Embiid very well. So I think that's an interesting little part of Nurse's past. But I think number two, he's similar in that he was capable of playing drop coverage really well, and that it didn't often make sense to have Marc Gasol switching out onto 6-foot guards and blitzing every single ball screen. I think Nurse tried to find the right balance between those variety of coverages, tried to mix it up effectively. And I'm intrigued to see with Joel Embiid, what is the approach stylistically? What defensive role does Nurse think he's best suited for? And I imagine the history with Gasol could be helpful in arriving at good answers there. And then just offensively, as I hit on earlier, Marc Gasol, like pretty special passer for a big man. And Nurse said at his press conference, yes, he wants Embiid to become more of a facilitator. Embiid, of course, has developed his game from the nail, from the top of the key. And Nick Nurse and Marc Gasol, that offense involved a lot of movement around Gasol at the top of the key. So I'm curious to see with Embiid how much they just space things out, keep it stationary, let him work, and how much they do incorporate some Chicago action, some backdoor cuts, just little wrinkles that the defense has to respect, and that could perhaps enable Joel Embiid to have more passing windows versus just everything being stationary, and you have to make those reads without designed offensive movement around him in the middle of the court. So that is what I thought was interesting about the history with Gasol. And yeah, I mean, Marc Gasol, like watching some of his whole game, and I mean, he's a world-class passer. Joel Embiid is not that, but he has gotten better. And I think in the playoffs, it consistently becomes really, really important because teams take away what you're best at. Joel Embiid is best at scoring. So I think they need him to keep improving as a passer, and Nurse now has the responsibility of helping him do that.
I was a big Marc Gasol grit and grind guy. And with all of that success they had with the Grizzlies, the indelible memory I have of Marc Gasol is the pep talk he tried to give Embiid after the Kawhi shot went in, and Embiid just breaking down, like crying on his shoulder. Like,
I know Embiid said, he appreciated that in a moment where he very well could have been celebrating, Gasol like looked out for him and recognized that he was really devastated. But yeah, Embiid right after that game was not hearing anything that anyone said.
Right.
That was very memorable how crushed he was by that defeat. And Gasol played him darn well in that series. Embiid, I think, averaged like 17 points, shot 38% from the floor. And Gasol was also the guy guarding him when Joel Embiid had the 0 in Toronto. So he was a pretty exceptional player defensively, former defensive player of the year. But I think the passing, how Nurse's history there with Gasol being a great passer and Embiid, that element, I think is going to be cool to watch.
Yeah, definitely. Well said, Noah. And check out Noah's work and his articles, plural, on NBCSportsPhiladelphia.com. That's it for the Sixers Talk podcast. Thank you for all of your expertise, Noah, and thank you for watching and listening wherever you get your podcasts. For Ben Barry and Noah, I'm Danny Pommells. This has been the Sixers Talk podcast brought to you by Wilmington University. WilMU Works.